The morning sun cast long shadows across the weathered wooden docks of Cedar Bay Marina as Sarah Chin stepped aboard her 30-foot sailing vessel, Silent Running. The boat had been her sanctuary for 3 years now, ever since she'd returned from her final deployment. Most people saw just another weekend sailor, a quiet woman in her mid-30s who kept to herself and paid her marina fees on time. They had no idea that the hands now checking the rigging had once defused improvised explosive devices in places most people couldn't pronounce. Sarah had chosen this marina specifically because it was tucked away from the main shipping channels, a place where she could disappear into the rhythm of tide and wind. The other boat owners were mostly retirees and weekend warriors who nodded politely but rarely asked questions. That suited her perfectly. Questions led to explanations, and explanations led to conversations she wasn't ready to have. She was securing a loose halyard when she noticed the official-looking pickup truck pulling into the marina parking lot. 2 men in matching polo shirts climbed out, clipboards in hand, and began walking purposefully down the main dock. Sarah's trained instincts kicked in automatically, cataloging details without conscious thought. The older man was heavy-set with a slight limp that suggested an old injury. The younger one carried himself with the cocky swagger of someone who enjoyed having authority over others. Marina owner Tom Bridgewater emerged from his office, his usual easy smile replaced by a worried frown. Sarah had always liked Tom. He was a former Navy enlisted man who ran an honest business and treated his customers fairly. Whatever was happening, it was making him nervous. "Morning, gentlemen," Tom called out as the two officials approached. "You're here about the Henderson account?" The older official, whose shirt identified him as Dennis Murphy from the County Harbor Authority, shook his head. "Actually, we're here about something else. We've received reports about several vessels operating without proper documentation. We need to conduct some inspections." Sarah continued working on her rigging, but her attention was fully focused on the conversation taking place 50 feet away. In her previous life, gathering intelligence had been second nature. Old habits died hard. The younger official, whose name tag read Brad Collins, was already scanning the marina with predatory interest. "We'll start with a random sampling of vessels. Anyone who can't produce proper registration, insurance, and safety documentation will face immediate impoundment." Tom's face darkened. "Now wait just a minute. I run a legitimate operation here. All my slip holders are required to provide current documentation before I'll rent to them." Murphy held up a placating hand. "I'm sure you do, Tom, but regulations have changed. We're now required to verify that all documentation meets current federal standards, not just state requirements. Some of these older registrations aren't going to cut it anymore." Sarah's jaw tightened. She recognized the tone, the bureaucratic doublespeak that usually preceded a shakedown. During her deployments, she'd seen local officials in various countries use similar tactics to extract bribes or simply flex their authority. The game was always the same, just the players changed. Collins was already walking toward the first row of boats, his clipboard ready. "Let's start with that sailboat there. The blue one with the Dodger." Silent Running asterisk sat in the third slip from the end, her dark blue hull gleaming in the morning sunlight. Sarah had spent countless hours maintaining every inch of the boat, treating it with the same meticulous care she'd once given to her equipment in the field. The vessel was her pride and joy, but more than that, it was her lifeline to sanity. "Excuse me, ma'am," Collins called out as he approached her slip. "I need to see your boat's documentation." Sarah looked up from her work, her expression neutral. "What kind of documentation?" "Registration, insurance, safety inspection certificates, and proof of compliance with current environmental regulations." Collins's voice carried the officious tone of someone who enjoyed making others jump through hoops. "And you are?" Sarah asked calmly, though she'd already read his name tag and mentally filed away every detail about both officials. "Brad Collins, Harbor Authority. This is an official inspection. I'll need to see those documents immediately, or I'll have to red tag this vessel for impoundment." Sarah wiped her hands on a rag and stepped onto the dock. At 5'6", she wasn't physically imposing, but there was something in the way she moved that suggested coiled energy. The boat is properly registered with the state. Insurance is current. I'm not aware of any new environmental regulations. Collins made a show of consulting his clipboard. Federal regulations require all vessels over 28 feet to undergo annual environmental impact assessments. When was your last assessment? The question was clearly a trap. Sarah knew there was no such requirement because she made it her business to stay current with maritime law. But Collins was betting she wouldn't know that or wouldn't have the knowledge to challenge him effectively. I'd like to see the specific regulation you're referencing, Sarah said quietly. Collins's smile faltered slightly. Most boat owners would have scrambled to produce whatever paperwork they had, hoping to satisfy the officials and avoid trouble. This woman wasn't playing along. Murphy, who had been watching the interaction, stepped forward. Ma'am, we don't have time for a legal seminar. Either you can produce the required documentation, or we'll have to impound the vessel pending a full compliance review. And what exactly does impoundment entail? Sarah asked. The boat gets towed to our secure facility. Storage fees are $40 per day, plus administrative costs. You can reclaim it once all documentation issues are resolved. Collins was clearly enjoying himself now. Of course, if it sits too long, we might have to auction it to recover our costs. Sarah felt the familiar cold anger that had served her well in dangerous situations. These men were running a scam, preying on boat owners who wouldn't know how to fight back. They probably targeted marinas like this one, where the owners were older or less sophisticated, hoping to intimidate people into paying fees or fines for non-existent violations. I see, she said calmly. And how many boats have you impounded using this particular interpretation of federal law? The question clearly caught both men off guard. Collins exchanged a quick glance with Murphy before answering. That's not relevant to your situation, ma'am. We're here to ensure compliance with current regulations. Tom Bridgewater had approached during the conversation, his face grim with worry. Sarah, maybe we should just let them do their inspection. I'm sure everything's in order with your documentation. Sarah appreciated Tom's attempt to defuse the situation, but she could see what was happening. These officials were establishing dominance, making it clear that they could take anyone's boat on a whim. If she backed down now, they'd have free rein to target other boat owners who might not be able to fight back. Actually, Tom, I think I'd like to understand the legal basis for this inspection first, Sarah said, her voice remaining perfectly calm. Mr. Collins, you mentioned federal environmental regulations. Which agency has jurisdiction? EPA, Coast Guard, Fish, and Wildlife. Collins's confident expression was beginning to crack. Look, lady, I don't need to explain federal law to you. Either produce the documents or watch your boat get towed. I'm not refusing to cooperate, Sarah replied. I'm asking for clarification on which specific regulations you're enforcing. Surely that's reasonable. Murphy decided to try a different approach. Ma'am, are you a lawyer or something? Because if you are, you should know that obstruction of an official investigation is a serious offense. Sarah almost smiled at that. During her military career, she dealt with hostile government officials, corrupt police, and bureaucrats who thought they could intimidate American service members. These two were amateurs by comparison. I'm not obstructing anything, she said. I'm exercising my right to understand what laws I'm supposedly violating before surrendering my property. The standoff was attracting attention from other boat owners. An elderly man named Frank Peterson emerged from his cabin cruiser to watch the proceedings. Margaret Walsh, who owned a small trawler, had stopped her morning cleaning routine to listen. Word was spreading quickly through the marina that something unusual was happening. Collins, clearly frustrated by Sarah's refusal to be intimidated, decided to escalate. Fine, out of your way. Dennis, call for the tow truck. Murphy pulled out his phone, but before he could dial, Sarah spoke again. Before you do that, I'd like to know something. Are either of you actually sworn law enforcement officers? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Collins's face reddened, and Murphy lowered his phone. We're authorized representatives of the County Harbor Authority, Murphy said carefully. That's not what I asked, Sarah pressed. Do you have arrest powers? Are you certified peace officers? We have authority to enforce maritime regulations within county waters, Collins snapped. Under what legal framework? Sarah's tone remained conversational, but there was steel underneath. County ordinance? State law? Federal delegation? By now, several boat owners had gathered to watch the confrontation. Frank Peterson, who Sarah knew was a retired attorney, was listening with obvious interest. Margaret Walsh had her phone out, apparently recording the conversation. Collins looked around nervously at the growing audience. Look, we don't need to have a legal debate here. The bottom line is simple. Comply with the inspection or face the consequences. Sarah studied both men carefully. In her experience, legitimate officials were happy to explain their authority and procedures. These two were deflecting and threatening, classic signs of people who were overstepping their bounds. I tell you what, she said finally, I'll make this simple for everyone. I'm going to call the Coast Guard station and ask them to clarify which federal environmental regulations apply to recreational vessels. Should take about 5 minutes to get an answer. The color drained from Collins's face. That won't be necessary. We can resolve this right here. Oh, I think it's very necessary, Sarah replied, pulling out her cell phone. In fact, I think the Coast Guard would be very interested to know that county officials are claiming authority over federal maritime law. Murphy grabbed Collins's arm. Maybe we should check some other boats first. Come back to this one later. But Sarah was already dialing. Coast Guard Station, Tampa Bay. This is Sarah Chun. I need to speak with someone about federal maritime environmental regulations. As she waited for the call to connect, Sarah watched both officials carefully. Their body language screamed guilt and panic. Collins kept looking toward the parking lot as if planning an escape route. Murphy was sweating despite the cool morning breeze. Yes, this is Petty Officer Martinez, came the voice from her phone. How can I help you, ma'am? Sarah put the phone on speaker so everyone could hear. I'm at Cedar Bay Marina, and I have 2 county officials claiming that federal law requires annual environmental impact assessments for recreational vessels over 28 feet. Can you confirm whether such a regulation exists? There was a brief pause. Ma'am, there's no such federal requirement for recreational vessels. Who exactly is making this claim? Collins and Murphy exchanged desperate looks. The game was up, and they knew it. 2 men from the County Harbor Authority, Sarah replied. They're threatening to impound boats that can't produce documentation for this non-existent regulation. That sounds like a scam, ma'am. We've had reports of people impersonating federal officials or making false claims about maritime law. Can you describe these individuals? Sarah began providing detailed descriptions of both men, including their names, appearance, and the specific claims they'd made. As she talked, Collins and Murphy started backing toward their truck. Hold on, Sarah called out, covering her phone. Where are you going? I thought you wanted to inspect my boat. Collins was practically running now. We'll be back with proper paperwork, he called over his shoulder. Petty Officer Martinez. The individuals appear to be fleeing the scene, Sarah reported calmly. Ma'am, can you get their license plate number? We'll want to forward this information to local law enforcement. Margaret Walsh, who had been recording the entire encounter, called out the truck's license number as it sped out of the marina parking lot. Several boat owners applauded as Sarah finished her call with the Coast Guard. Tom Bridgewater shook his head in amazement. Sarah, I don't know how you knew to handle them like that, but you probably saved everyone here a lot of trouble and money. Frank Peterson walked over, grinning. Young lady, that was the finest piece of legal intimidation I've seen in 40 years of practicing law. Those scammers picked the wrong target. Sarah felt the adrenaline beginning to fade, replaced by the familiar emptiness that always followed moments of intense focus. They were just bullies. Bullies usually fold when someone calls their bluff. But even as she said it, Sarah knew this wasn't over. Scammers didn't like being embarrassed, especially not in front of witnesses. They'd be back, probably with a different approach. And next time, they'd know she wasn't going to be an easy mark. Margaret Walsh approached with her phone still recording. Honey, this video is going straight to the sheriff's department and the local news. People need to know about these scams. Good idea, Sarah agreed. The more publicity this gets, the less likely they are to try it again somewhere else. As the crowd of boat owners dispersed, each telling their version of events to anyone who would listen, Sarah returned to her rigging work. But her mind was already analyzing the encounter looking for patterns and planning contingencies. The officials had been too well-dressed and organized to be simple opportunists. Someone was running a sophisticated operation, targeting marinas and boat owners with carefully crafted legal-sounding intimidation. They'd probably done this successfully at other locations, taking advantage of people who didn't know their rights or didn't have the knowledge to fight back. Sarah had disrupted their operation, but that would make her a problem to be solved. In her experience, problems like her tended to attract bigger problems in return. She finished securing her rigging and went below to check her boat's documentation. Everything was properly filed and current, just as she'd maintained it since buying the vessel. But she also pulled out a waterproof folder she kept locked in her navigation station. Inside were documents most civilian boat owners would never need: discharge papers, security clearances, commendation letters, and contact information for people in various government agencies. Sarah had hoped never to need those contacts again. She'd left that life behind when she bought silent running and tried to disappear into the anonymity of merino life. But sometimes the past had a way of becoming relevant again, whether you wanted it to or not. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Nice work today, but this isn't over." Sarah stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it. She'd been threatened by experts in places where threats carried real consequences. Two small-time scammers didn't worry her. But as she prepared to leave the marina for her planned day sail, Sarah made a mental note to vary her routine for the next few weeks. Old habits from her previous life were reasserting themselves, and for good reason. She'd made enemies today, and enemies had a tendency to escalate situations. The wind was picking up as Sarah motored silent running out of the marina basin. Once she cleared the channel markers, she raised her mainsail and felt the familiar peace that came with being under sail. Out here, surrounded by water and sky, the complications of shore life seemed manageable. But even as she enjoyed the morning's sail, part of Sarah's mind remained alert and analytical. She'd won today's battle through knowledge and careful questioning, but the war was probably just beginning. Whoever was behind the scam operation wouldn't appreciate having their scheme exposed. They'd either disappear and try their luck elsewhere, or they'd come back with a different approach. Sarah found herself hoping for the former, but preparing for the latter. After all, she'd survived much worse than a couple of bureaucratic bullies. The question was whether they were smart enough to realize they'd picked a fight with someone who fought back. 3 days after the confrontation at the marina, Sarah was beginning to think the scammers had moved on to easier targets. The story had made the local news, with Margaret Walsh's video going viral on social media. The sheriff's department had opened an investigation, and the Coast Guard was actively warning marinas about the fake inspection scam. Sarah had settled back into her routine of morning maintenance on silent running, followed by day sails when the weather permitted. She was replacing a worn dock line when Tom Bridgewater approached with an expression that immediately put her on alert. "Sarah, we need to talk," he said quietly, glancing around the marina nervously. Privately, she followed him to his office, a cluttered space that smelled of coffee and marine diesel. Tom closed the door and gestured for her to sit down. "I got a visit yesterday evening. After most folks had gone home," he began. 3 men in suits said they were federal investigators looking into the incident with those fake harbor authority guys. Sarah's instincts sharpened. What kind of federal investigators? That's just it. They showed badges, but something felt off about the whole thing. They asked a lot of questions about you specifically. Wanted to know how long you'd been here, what kind of boat you owned, whether you'd ever mentioned your background. What did you tell them? Tom shifted uncomfortably. The truth, that you've been a model customer for 3 years, pay your bills on time, keep to yourself. But, Sarah, they seem to know things about you already. One of them mentioned that you'd served in the military. Sarah felt a familiar chill. She'd been careful to keep her service record private, sharing only the minimum necessary information when she'd applied for her slip at the marina. The fact that strangers were asking specific questions about her military background was deeply troubling. Did they leave any contact information? So they'd be back if they needed anything else. But here's the thing that really bothered me. Tom leaned forward, lowering his voice even further. After they left, I noticed one of them had been taking pictures of your boat with his phone. Real casual-like, but I saw him doing it. The pieces were starting to form a pattern that Sarah didn't like. Professional scammers would have moved on after being exposed. The fact that people were still sniffing around suggested something more serious was happening. Tom, I need you to call me immediately if anyone else comes around asking questions. And maybe invest in some security cameras for the marina office and parking lot. Tom nodded grimly. Already ordered them. Frank Peterson thinks this whole thing stinks to high heaven. Says in his experience, when fake federal agents start showing up, it usually means someone stepped in something deep. After leaving Tom's office, Sarah spent the rest of the morning thinking through possibilities. The most likely explanation was that the original scammers were part of a larger criminal organization that didn't appreciate having their operation disrupted. But the mention of her military service raised other possibilities, none of them good. She was securing her boat for the day when she noticed a man sitting in a car at the far end of the marina parking lot. He appeared to be reading a newspaper, but something about his positioning and the way he occasionally glanced toward the docks suggested surveillance. Sarah had spent enough time conducting and avoiding surveillance to recognize the signs. The man was trying to look casual, but his vehicle was positioned to observe both the marina entrance and her slip. More troubling, when she tested his reaction by walking toward the parking lot, he immediately started his engine and drove away. That evening, Sarah made a secure phone call to a number she'd hoped never to use again. Miller. Jack, it's Sarah Chun. There was a brief pause. Sarah? Jesus, it's been what, 2 years? How the hell are you? Master Sergeant Jack Miller had been Sarah's team leader during her final deployment. He was one of the few people from her military life who knew her current location and civilian identity. I'm fine, but I think I might have a problem. Have you heard any chatter about me recently? Negative. You're still maintaining your low profile, right? No contact with the old gang. Completely dark for 3 years now. But I had an incident a few days ago that's escalating in ways that don't make sense. Sarah explained the marina confrontation and the subsequent visits from supposed federal investigators. Jack listened without interruption, occasionally asking clarifying questions. Sarah, this doesn't sound like random criminals. The fact that they knew about your military service suggests someone with access to classified information or old personnel files. That's what I was afraid of. Look, I can make some calls, see if there's any official interest in your activities. But if this is what I think it might be, you need to consider activating some old protocols. Sarah knew what he meant. During their deployments, they developed contingency plans for situations where team members might be compromised or targeted after returning to civilian life. The plans included escape routes, safe houses, and emergency contacts with people who could provide protection or assistance. I was hoping to avoid that, she said quietly. I know, but Sarah, if someone's running surveillance on you and asking questions about your background, this could get serious fast. These people might not be after money. After ending the call, Sarah spent the evening reviewing her situation. She'd been naive to think her past would stay buried forever. During her military career, she'd made enemies in several countries and had been involved in operations that certain groups would love to see avenged. The fact that she disrupted a criminal operation might have been enough to trigger a deeper investigation into her identity. The next morning brought unwelcome confirmation of her fears. Sarah arrived at the marina to find her boat's dock lines cut and several pieces of expensive electronics missing from her cockpit. Nothing had been stolen from other boats, making it clear that silent running had been specifically targeted. Tom was furious when she reported the vandalism. I'm calling the sheriff right now. This is getting out of hand. But Sarah was more concerned with what hadn't been stolen than with what had been taken. The thieves had ignored her GPS unit and radio, instead taking her satellite communication device and the small laptop she used for navigation. Both items contained encrypted data and communication protocols that could reveal far more about her background than mere serial numbers. Deputy Sheriff Maria Santos arrived within an hour to investigate the break-in. She was a competent-looking woman in her 30s who took detailed notes and asked intelligent questions. Ms. Chun, Have you had any conflicts with other marina users? Any personal disputes that might explain why your boat was specifically targeted? Sarah hesitated. The truth would open up areas of her life she preferred to keep private, but lying to a police officer investigating a crime against her wasn't an option. I had a confrontation several days ago with two men claiming to be from the County Harbor Authority. They were running a scam, tried to intimidate boat owners into paying fake fees. I called the Coast Guard and exposed them. Deputy Santos consulted her notebook. That's the incident that made the news? The video that went viral? Yes. Since then, I've had people asking questions about my background and conducting surveillance on the marina. The deputy's expression grew more serious. What kind of background information were they seeking? Questions about my military service. Santos looked up sharply. You serve in the military? Army. 3 tours overseas. I've been out for 3 years. What was your job in the Army? Sarah met the deputy's eyes directly. Explosive ordnance disposal. And some other things are still classified. The deputy put down her pen and studied Sarah carefully. Ms. Chun, I think we need to have a longer conversation about this. Off the record, they moved to Tom's office, where Deputy Santos closed the door and activated a small device that Sarah recognized as an electronic countermeasure against listening devices. Ms. Chun, I used to work for DHS before I became a county deputy. I've seen situations like this before. When former military personnel with specialized backgrounds start getting attention from unknown parties, it's usually not a coincidence. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that your marina incident might have been a catalyst, but the real issue is probably your past catching up with you. The question is whether we're dealing with criminals seeking revenge, foreign intelligence services, or something else entirely. Sarah appreciated the deputy's direct approach. What do you recommend? First, we treat this as a serious threat to your safety. I'm going to recommend increased patrols around the marina and coordinate with federal agencies that might have jurisdiction. Second, you need to consider whether staying here is safe. I'm not running from small-time criminals. Deputy Santos leaned forward. With respect, ma'am, I don't think these are small-time criminals anymore. The surveillance, the specific targeting, the interest in your military background, this has the hallmarks of something much more serious. That afternoon, Sarah received another troubling development. Frank Peterson approached her as she was installing new security equipment on her boat. Sarah, I had a visit this morning that I think you should know about. A woman, claiming to be from your old unit, said she was trying to get in touch with you about a reunion. Sarah felt ice in her veins. What did she look like? Attractive, professional. Dark hair, maybe 40 years old. Had some kind of accent I couldn't place. Thing is, she knew details about your boat and your routine that she shouldn't have known unless she'd been watching you. What did you tell her? Nothing. Something about her felt wrong, so I said I didn't know anything about your background. But, Sarah, she mentioned specific places where you'd served. Places I doubt would be common knowledge. Sarah's mind was racing. The woman Frank described didn't match anyone from her actual unit. But the fact that she knew deployment locations meant someone with access to classified information was involved. Frank, if anyone else comes around asking about me, don't engage with them at all. Just call the sheriff's department immediately. Already planned on it. But, Sarah, maybe it's time you told us what kind of trouble you're really in. Sarah looked around the marina that had been her sanctuary for 3 years. Other boat owners were going about their daily routines, unaware that their peaceful community was being infiltrated by people with unknown agendas. She felt responsible for bringing danger to their doorstep. Frank, what I did in the Army made some dangerous enemies. I thought I'd left that world behind, but it appears that world has found me. What kind of enemies? Sarah chose her words carefully. The kind that don't forget and don't forgive, and the kind that won't hesitate to hurt innocent people to get what they want. That evening, Sarah made another secure call, this time to a different number. Richardson. Colonel, it's Sarah Chun. Colonel James Richardson had been Sarah's commanding officer during her most sensitive assignments. He was one of the few people who knew the complete details of her overseas operations. Sarah, I was wondering when I'd hear from you. We've been monitoring some chatter that might be relevant to your situation. What kind of chatter? the kind that suggests certain parties have been actively searching for former members of your unit. We think someone's been systematically targeting people with knowledge of specific operations. Sarah felt a chill of recognition. How many others have been contacted? 3 that we know of. 2 have already relocated to secure facilities. The third, Richardson paused. The third didn't make it to safety. The implication hung in the air like a death sentence. Sarah had been part of a unit that conducted highly classified operations against terrorist networks and hostile intelligence services. The number of people who might want revenge against unit members was substantial and international in scope. Colonel, what are my options? Officially, I can't offer you anything. Your unit was disbanded, and most records are sealed. Unofficially, there are people who remember what you did for this country and are willing to help. I need to know who's after me and why. We're working on it. But, Sarah, in the meantime, you need to assume you're being hunted by professionals. These aren't street criminals or even domestic terrorists. We're talking about people with resources, training, and international connections. After ending the call, Sarah sat in her boat's cabin, thinking through her situation. She tried to build a quiet, anonymous life, but her past was catching up with her in the worst possible way. Staying at the marina put innocent people at risk, but running would mean abandoning the life she'd carefully constructed. More importantly, running would mean letting her enemies dictate her actions. Sarah had never backed down from a fight when she was in uniform, and she wasn't about to start now. She pulled out her laptop and began making a different kind of plan. If people wanted to find her, she'd make sure they found exactly what they were looking for. But they might not like what they discovered when they did. Sarah had learned long ago that the best defense was often a carefully planned offense. She'd spent 3 years trying to be invisible, but invisibility was just another tactical option. Sometimes the situation called for a more direct approach. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. We know where you live. We know where you work. We know everyone you care about. You have 48 hours. Sarah stared at the message for a moment, then typed back, 48 hours for what? The response came immediately, to disappear. Or we start with your marina friends. Sarah deleted the message thread and smiled grimly. Her enemies had just made a crucial mistake. They'd threatened innocent people, which transformed this from a personal vendetta into something much more serious. She opened her secure communication system and began sending messages to old contacts. If someone wanted to play hardball with a former Special Forces operative, she was happy to accommodate them. But they were about to learn that some people were much more dangerous when cornered than when left alone. The game was about to change dramatically, and Sarah intended to be the one setting the new rules. The morning of the deadline arrived gray and overcast, with storm clouds building on the horizon. Sarah had spent the previous 48 hours transforming from hunted prey into a predator preparing to strike back. Her boat looked the same from the outside, but Silent Running was now equipped with surveillance equipment, communication gear, and other items that most recreational sailors would never need. More importantly, Sarah was no longer alone. Help had arrived during the night in the form of people who owed her favors from the old days. They were positioned around the marina, invisible to casual observation, but ready to respond if things went badly. Sarah was performing routine maintenance on her rigging when she spotted the first hostile surveillance team. 2 men in a rental car had positioned themselves to observe her boat while trying to look like tourists consulting a map. Their positioning and equipment marked them as professionals, but they'd made the mistake of assuming she was still operating as a civilian. At exactly noon, her secure phone buzzed with an incoming call from an encrypted number. Ms. Chun, I believe we have matters to discuss. The voice was cultured, with a slight accent that Sarah couldn't immediately place. The caller sounded confident, almost amused. I'm listening, Sarah replied, while simultaneously activating recording equipment and sending an alert to her backup team. You've become quite inconvenient, my dear. Your little performance at the marina has created complications for certain business operations. What kind of business operations? The caller chuckled softly. The profitable kind. Your friends at the marina have been quite useful for our purposes. a steady stream of wealthy boat owners with valuable assets and predictable routines. Very convenient for taxation purposes. Sarah understood immediately. The fake harbor authority scam had been just one part of a larger operation targeting marina communities. They were probably running multiple schemes: fake inspections, fraudulent liens, identity theft, and possibly boat theft rings. Her exposure of the scam had damaged their entire operation. "So this is about money after all," she said. "Partly. But you've also demonstrated an unfortunate tendency to ask inconvenient questions and involve federal authorities. That makes you a liability that needs to be eliminated. And you thought threatening my friends would make me disappear quietly? Experience suggests that most people become quite cooperative when the safety of others is at stake. But then, most people don't have your particular background." The admission that they knew about her military service confirmed Sarah's worst fears. Whoever was behind this operation had done serious research into her identity and capabilities. "What do you want?" she asked directly. "Simple. You will transfer ownership of your vessel to a company we designate. You will then leave this area permanently and never return. In exchange, no harm will come to anyone at your marina. And if I refuse, then we'll demonstrate why cooperation would have been preferable." The line went dead, leaving Sarah staring at her phone. The ultimatum was clearly intended to force her into an impossible choice: abandon her life and let the criminals continue preying on innocent people, or fight back and risk getting her friends hurt. Sarah had faced similar situations during her military career, where enemies used civilians as leverage against legitimate operations. The key was always to change the tactical situation so that the hostage-takers became the ones at risk. She activated her communication system and began coordinating with her backup team. If the criminals wanted to escalate this conflict, she was prepared to accommodate them. But they were about to discover that they'd picked a fight with someone who specialized in unconventional warfare. An hour later, Tom Bridgewater approached her slip with obvious anxiety. "Sarah, there are some people here asking about slip availability. Something feels wrong about them." Sarah looked toward the marina office and spotted 3 individuals who were clearly conducting reconnaissance while pretending to be potential customers. Their positioning, equipment, and behavior marked them as the advance team for whatever operation was being planned. "Tom, I need you to do exactly what I tell you," Sarah said quietly. "Go back to your office and call Deputy Santos. Tell her the situation has escalated and that she needs to clear all non-essential personnel from the marina immediately." "What's happening?" "These people aren't here to rent slips. They're here to make good on their threats." As Tom hurried away, Sarah activated a concealed radio. "Overwatch, this is base. Confirm positions and readiness status. Overwatch 1, position secured, target acquisition complete. Overwatch 2, perimeter established, no additional hostiles detected. Overwatch 3, exit routes confirmed, extraction assets standing by." Sarah had learned long ago that the best way to deal with terrorists and criminals was to out-prepare them and maintain superior tactical position. Her enemies thought they were hunting an isolated civilian. Instead, they'd walked into a carefully prepared ambush. The fake customers were moving closer to her boat, trying to maintain their cover while conducting detailed surveillance. Sarah continued her maintenance work while tracking their movements and coordinating with her team. At exactly 2 o'clock, the situation escalated dramatically. Sarah was securing a dock line when she heard the distinctive sound of boat engines approaching fast from the channel. 2 high-speed inflatables were racing toward the marina, loaded with armed men who clearly weren't concerned about maintaining a low profile. "All units, we have waterborne hostiles approaching from the southeast," Sarah reported calmly. "Estimate 6 to 8 individuals, armed and dangerous." The response from Overwatch 1 was immediate. "Base, we have eyes on targets. Rules of engagement. Weapons free if they threaten civilian lives. Priority is protection of innocent parties." The situation was spiraling exactly as Sarah had expected. The criminals had concluded that subtle intimidation wasn't working and had decided to use direct violence. Their plan was probably to take hostages at the marina and force Sarah's compliance through brute force. What they didn't realize was that Sarah had anticipated this escalation and prepared accordingly. The first inflatable boat rounded the marina breakwater with its engines roaring. Armed men in tactical gear were clearly visible, their weapons ready for immediate use. Several boat owners who were visible on the docks began running for cover. Sarah keyed her radio. All units, initiate defensive operations, protect civilian evacuees, and maintain tactical superiority. What happened next unfolded with the precision of a military operation. Concealed positions around the marina suddenly came alive with precisely aimed suppressive fire that disabled both inflatable boats without endangering the occupants. The attacking force found themselves taking fire from multiple directions while their escape routes were systematically cut off. Within minutes, the would-be attackers were face down on the marina docks with their hands zip-tied behind their backs. Several marina residents emerged from secure positions to discover that their quiet sailing community had briefly become a battlefield. Deputy Santos arrived with multiple backup units to find the situation completely under control. The attacking force was secured, evidence was being collected, and civilian casualties were zero. "Ms. Chun, would you care to explain what just happened here?" the deputy asked, surveying the scene with professional interest. "Community self-defense," Sarah replied calmly. "We received credible threats against marina residents and took appropriate precautionary measures." Deputy Santos looked around at the tactical precision of the operation, the professional equipment, and the obvious military expertise that had been deployed. These precautionary measures look surprisingly sophisticated for civilian self-defense. Some of us have relevant experience. The deputy nodded slowly. "I see. And I suppose the identities of your associates will be difficult to verify. They prefer to maintain their privacy." "Of course they do." The interrogation of the captured attackers revealed the scope of the criminal operation that Sarah had inadvertently disrupted. The organization was running sophisticated fraud schemes targeting maritime communities across 3 states, generating millions of dollars in illegal revenue through fake regulations, fraudulent boat seizures, and identity theft operations. More disturbing was the discovery that the criminal organization had connections to international trafficking networks and was being protected by corrupt officials in multiple jurisdictions. Sarah's exposure of their marina scam had threatened to unravel a much larger criminal enterprise. The leader of the attacking force, a man named Viktor Petrov, eventually agreed to cooperate in exchange for protective custody. His revelations painted a picture of a criminal network that specialized in targeting isolated communities where law enforcement response was slow and residents were unlikely to have the knowledge or resources to fight back effectively. "Your friend made a serious mistake," Petrov told investigators. "She exposed an operation that was protected by people who don't tolerate interference. The orders were to eliminate her as an example to others." "What kind of people?" Deputy Santos asked. "The kind who view opposition as a business problem to be solved permanently." Sarah wasn't surprised by the revelation. During her military career, she'd encountered criminal organizations that operated like intelligence services, using violence, corruption, and intimidation to protect their operations. Exposing such groups was always dangerous because they viewed any threat to their business as an act of war. But she'd also learned that such organizations relied heavily on fear and the assumption that their targets would be unable to fight back effectively. When confronted by superior force and tactical expertise, they usually collapsed quickly. The follow-up investigation revealed that the criminal network had been operating for over 5 years, targeting marina communities because boat owners typically had significant assets and limited security awareness. They'd successfully run their schemes at dozens of locations, stealing millions of dollars through various fraudulent means. Sarah's simple refusal to be intimidated had started a chain of events that ultimately destroyed the entire operation. Colonel Richardson called her that evening with an update on the broader situation. "Sarah, the intelligence community is very interested in what you've uncovered. This criminal network has connections to several foreign intelligence services and terrorist financing operations. Meaning, meaning your Little Marina incident has national security implications. The people who were after you were more dangerous than we initially realized. How dangerous? Dangerous enough that certain agencies are recommending you accept protective relocation and a new identity. Sarah looked out at the marina where her neighbors were returning to their normal routines. Tom was already making plans to upgrade security systems. Frank Peterson was organizing a marina watch program. Margaret Walsh was editing her footage of the day's events for another viral social media post. I appreciate the offer, Colonel, but I think I'll stay put. Sarah, these people have long memories and significant resources. Just because you've disrupted their operation doesn't mean the threat is over. Maybe not, but running away would mean letting them win. After ending the call, Sarah walked the docks of her marina community. The events of the past week had transformed her quiet sanctuary into something more complex, but also more genuine. Her neighbors now knew that she was someone who would fight for their safety, and she knew that they were the kind of people worth fighting for. The criminals had made a crucial error in targeting her community. They'd assumed that boat owners were soft targets who would submit to intimidation rather than fight back. Instead, they discovered that some communities contained people who were willing and able to defend what they valued. Sarah's secure phone buzzed with a message from an unknown international number. "This isn't over." She typed back, "No, it's not. But next time you'll know exactly who you're dealing with." The response came immediately. "We'll be ready." Sarah smiled grimly as she deleted the message thread. Her enemies were probably right that this conflict wasn't over. But they were wrong about who would be ready when it resumed. She'd spent 3 years learning to be a civilian, but the past week had reminded her that some skills never really went dormant. The next time someone threatened her community, they discovered that Sarah Chin wasn't just a former soldier trying to blend in with civilian life. She was a warrior who'd found something worth protecting. 6 months after the marina attack, Sarah stood on the deck of Silent Running watching the sunrise paint the water in shades of gold and crimson. The peaceful scene belied the significant changes that had transformed both her life and the marina community since that violent confrontation. The immediate aftermath of the attack had brought unwanted attention from multiple agencies, media outlets, and curious onlookers. Sarah had endured weeks of interviews, debriefings, and background investigations as authorities worked to understand the full scope of the criminal network she'd helped expose. The investigation had revealed a conspiracy that reached far beyond simple marina fraud. The criminal organization had been running sophisticated operations across the southeastern United States, targeting not just boat owners, but also RV parks, private airports, and other communities where wealthy individuals maintained expensive recreational assets. Their method was always the same: infiltrate communities with fake officials claiming regulatory authority, intimidate residents into paying fraudulent fees or surrendering property, and use violence against anyone who resisted. The profits funded other criminal activities, including drug trafficking, human trafficking, and weapons smuggling. Sarah's refusal to be intimidated had triggered the investigation that ultimately dismantled the entire network. More than 60 arrests had been made across 4 states, and millions of dollars in stolen assets had been recovered and returned to victims. But the victory had come at a personal cost. Sarah's military background was now part of the public record, making it impossible to maintain the anonymous civilian life she'd carefully constructed. News media had dubbed her the Warrior of Cedar Bay, a title that made her deeply uncomfortable. More concerning were the ongoing security threats from remnants of the criminal organization and their international connections. Despite the arrests, several key figures had escaped capture and were believed to be planning retaliation against the people who'd exposed their operation. Sarah had been forced to accept a level of security protection that she found intrusive and limiting. Federal marshals maintained surveillance around the marina, and her movements were monitored by people whose job was to keep her safe from enemies she'd made by doing the right thing. The morning ritual of checking her boat had become a careful security procedure involving multiple observers and communication protocols. Sarah missed the simple pleasure of working on her rigging without wondering whether hostile surveillance teams were watching from concealment. Tom Bridgewater approached her slip with his usual morning coffee and a stack of paperwork that had become depressingly familiar. The marina owner had been dealing with insurance claims, security upgrades, and media requests for months. "Morning, Sarah. The FBI wants to schedule another interview about the financial records they recovered from that warehouse in Jacksonville." Sarah sighed. The investigation seemed to generate endless requests for her time and testimony. What do they need this time? Something about overseas bank transfers and possible terrorism financing connections. Agent Morrison thinks you might recognize some of the operational patterns from your military service. The suggestion that her expertise was still needed for the investigation was both flattering and exhausting. Sarah had provided detailed analysis of the criminal organization's methods, helping investigators understand how military-style planning had been adapted for civilian criminal operations. "Schedule it for next week," she said. "I want to get a few more days of normal sailing in before I have to think about international terrorism financing again." Tom nodded sympathetically. "You know, if you ever want to move your boat to a less notorious marina, I'd understand completely. This place has become a circus." Sarah looked around at the marina that had been her refuge for 3 years. The docks were now equipped with security cameras and motion sensors. A guard shack had been installed at the entrance, staffed 24 hours a day by off-duty police officers. The relaxed atmosphere that had originally attracted her to Cedar Bay had been replaced by the kind of security measures she'd hoped to leave behind with her military career. But she'd also discovered something valuable in the process of defending her community. The other boat owners had rallied around her during the difficult months following the attack, providing support and friendship that went far beyond casual marina relationships. Frank Peterson had used his legal expertise to help victims of the fraud scheme recover their losses. Margaret Walsh had organized a support network for marina residents dealing with trauma and security concerns. Even elderly residents who had no direct involvement in the conflict had stepped up to help with everything from meal preparation to transportation during the extended investigation. "Tom, this community is worth the inconvenience," Sarah said finally. "These people stood by me when things got dangerous. I'm not abandoning them now." Her secure phone buzzed with an incoming message from Colonel Richardson. "Sarah, we need to talk. Priority 1. Sarah's blood chilled. Priority 1 communications were reserved for imminent threats to life and safety. She activated her encrypted communication system and called the colonel back immediately. "Richardson, Colonel, you sent Priority 1. What's happening?" "Sarah, intelligence sources indicate that a contract has been placed on your life. High-level international players who lost significant money when their network was exposed. We're talking about professional assassins with serious resources." Sarah felt the familiar cold clarity that came with genuine danger. "How credible is the threat?" "Credible enough that I'm recommending immediate relocation to a secure facility. We can have you extracted from the marina within an hour." Sarah looked out at the peaceful morning scene, knowing that it might be the last time she'd see her home marina looking normal and safe. The criminals she'd fought were escalating their retaliation, just as she'd predicted they would. "Colonel, what's the timeline on this threat?" "Unknown, but likely imminent. Our sources suggest the contract was activated 72 hours ago. And my friends at the marina? Not specific targets, but collateral damage is always a possibility with this level of threat." Sarah felt the weight of decision pressing down on her. Accepting protective relocation would mean abandoning the life and community she'd fought to defend. But staying would put innocent people at risk from enemies who wouldn't hesitate to use extreme violence. "Colonel, I need an hour to think about this." "Sarah, there isn't time for 1 hour. Then I'll give you my answer." After ending the call, Sarah walked the docks of her marina community one last time. She passed familiar boats whose owners had become genuine friends over the past months. She stopped by Tom's office, where he was dealing with the endless paperwork that had resulted from the investigation. Frank Peterson was working on his boat's engine, cursing creatively at mechanical problems that had nothing to do with international criminal conspiracies. Margaret Walsh was editing another social media post, this one about marina security improvements rather than criminal confrontations. These were good people who'd been caught up in circumstances beyond their control because they'd had the misfortune to live in the same community as someone with a violent past. They deserved better than to spend their retirement years worrying about assassins and terrorist retaliation. Sarah made her decision. She returned to silent running and began methodically packing the personal items that mattered most to her. Military medals, photographs from her service years, and a few books went into a waterproof bag that she could carry easily. Everything else would stay with the boat. Her secure phone rang again. Richardson. Colonel, I'll accept the protective relocation. But I have conditions. What kind of conditions? First, the marina gets permanent federal protection. These people didn't ask to be targets, and they shouldn't have to live in fear because of my past. That's irregular, but probably manageable. Second, I want to be involved in hunting down the people who've placed this contract. I'm tired of running from consequences of doing the right thing. Sarah, protective relocation means disappearing completely. You can't be operational and invisible at the same time. Then, maybe it's time to stop being invisible. There was a long pause. What are you proposing? I'm proposing that instead of hiding from my past, I embrace it. These criminals are using my reputation to threaten innocent people. Maybe it's time to use that reputation more productively. Explain. Sarah looked out at the marina community one last time, seeing it now as a symbol of everything worth protecting in civilian life. Colonel, what if instead of disappearing, I became officially available for situations like this? Communities that need help dealing with threats they can't handle through normal channels. You're talking about some kind of government consultation role. I'm talking about doing what I'm apparently good at, protecting people from predators who think civilians are easy targets. The idea crystallized as she spoke. Sarah had tried to leave her warrior identity behind, but events had proven that some threats required a warrior's response. Instead of fighting that reality, maybe she should accept it and use her skills where they were needed most. It's an interesting concept, Richardson admitted. There are definitely situations where conventional law enforcement isn't adequate, but military deployment isn't appropriate either. Communities like this marina exist all over the country. Isolated, wealthy, filled with people who've worked hard for what they have and don't deserve to be victimized by sophisticated criminal operations. And you think your background makes you uniquely qualified to help them? Sarah smiled grimly. Colonel, I know it does. The past 6 months have proven that. 2 hours later, Sarah stood on the dock, saying goodbye to the community that had become her chosen family. Tom Bridgewater gripped her hand tightly, his usual easy demeanor replaced by genuine emotion. Sarah, you've given us more than we could ever repay. This place will always be your home, no matter where your work takes you. Frank Peterson, the retired attorney who'd become her unofficial legal advisor, handed her a business card. If you ever need anything, legal help, character references, someone to vouch for your integrity, you call that number immediately. Margaret Walsh, the social media maven who'd helped expose the original criminal scheme, was documenting their farewell for what she promised would be a more private video than her usual viral posts. The world needs to know that there are people like you out there, willing to stand up for what's right. As the federal protection team escorted her away from Cedar Bay Marina, Sarah felt a complex mix of loss and anticipation. She was leaving behind the quiet civilian life she'd tried to build, but she was also embracing a purpose that felt more authentic than anything she'd attempted since leaving the military. Her new role would be officially classified, operating in the gray area between civilian law enforcement and military action. She'd work with federal agencies to identify and neutralize sophisticated threats against communities that couldn't protect themselves through conventional means. The work would be dangerous, but it would also be meaningful in a way that her previous attempts at civilian life had never achieved. She found her calling in protecting the kind of community she'd discovered at Cedar Bay Marina. Good people living quiet lives who deserve to be safe from predators. 6 months later, Sarah received a secure message from Tom Bridgewater. The marina is safe, the community is thriving, and everyone asks about you constantly. Thank you for everything you've done for us. She typed back, thank you for showing me what's worth fighting for. Sarah's new career had taken her to 12 different communities facing sophisticated criminal threats. She'd helped expose corruption, neutralize violent organizations, and protect innocent people from predators who'd thought themselves untouchable. Each operation reinforced her belief that the skills she'd learned in military service had civilian applications that went far beyond her original understanding. The warrior ethos of protecting those who couldn't protect themselves was equally valid whether the threats came from foreign terrorists or domestic criminal organizations. Her secure phone buzzed with notification of a new assignment. A luxury RV resort in Arizona, where residents were being systematically defrauded by people claiming to represent federal environmental agencies. Sarah smiled as she read the briefing. Some criminals never learned that targeting the wrong community could lead to consequences they weren't prepared to handle. She began planning her approach to the new situation, incorporating lessons learned from her experience at Cedar Bay Marina. The operation would require careful intelligence gathering, community engagement, and precise tactical planning. But, most importantly, it would require the kind of protective instinct that had first emerged when fake officials threatened her marina neighbors. Sarah had discovered that her true calling wasn't avoiding conflict, but ensuring that the right people won when conflict became unavoidable. The warrior identity she tried to leave behind had evolved into something more sophisticated but equally important, a guardian who specialized in protecting communities from threats that conventional authorities couldn't handle effectively. As her plane lifted off for Arizona, Sarah reflected on the path that had led her from trying to disappear into civilian life to embracing a role that required her unique combination of military expertise and protective instinct. The criminals who targeted her marina had made a fundamental error. They'd assumed that exposing their operation would be the end of their problems. Instead, they'd created an adversary who understood both their methods and their weaknesses, and who dedicated her life to protecting other communities from similar predators. Sarah's war wasn't over. It had simply found a new battlefield and a more meaningful purpose.